Sometimes the most powerful emotional moments arrive when a person least expects them. Not during a lonely night, not during a period of reflection, not when they are actively thinking about the past. Instead, they appear during ordinary moments when life seems completely settled. And that is exactly where your soulmate found themselves recently. For a long time, they believed a certain chapter of their life had reached its natural conclusion. They believed enough time had passed. They believed enough healing had happened. Most importantly, they believed the feelings they once carried had slowly faded into memory. Life gave them plenty of reasons to believe this. New experiences arrived. New responsibilities demanded attention. Days turned into months and months turned into years. The connection that once occupied so much space in their heart gradually became something they thought about less and less. It wasn't that they forgot. It was simply that the emotional intensity seemed gone. Whenever thoughts of the past appeared, they felt manageable, distant, almost like looking at photographs from another lifetime. Because of that, they became confident that whatever feelings once existed had finally lost their hold on them. What they didn't realize was that sometimes emotions do not disappear. Sometimes they simply become quiet, hidden beneath routines, distractions, and the constant movement of everyday life. A person can go years believing they have fully moved on, not because the feelings are gone, but because nothing has challenged them recently enough to bring them back to the surface. Your soulmate had no reason to question their assumptions. As far as they were concerned, the story was finished. Lately, if someone had asked them how they felt about the connection, they would have answered without hesitation. They would have said they had made peace with it. They would have said they appreciated the experience for what it was and continued moving forward. And they genuinely believed that. There was no internal conflict, no emotional struggle, no sign that anything remained unresolved. Everything seemed clear, and listen to this, because this is where everything begins to change. The universe has a strange way of testing the things people think they understand about themselves. Just when your soulmate became completely certain that the past no longer had power over them, an unexpected moment appeared. A moment so ordinary on the surface that it should have meant nothing. Yet the instant it happened, something inside them shifted. A feeling they thought had disappeared suddenly stirred awake. A memory they believed had lost its emotional weight suddenly felt alive again. And in that single moment, a certainty they had carried for so long began to crack. Because for the first time in years, they found themselves asking a question they never expected to ask again. What if those feelings never truly faded at all? And listen to this, because the moment that changed everything was not dramatic. There was no grand event, no life-altering revelation, and no warning that anything significant was about to happen. In fact, that is what made it so powerful. It arrived disguised as an ordinary moment, a brief encounter, a passing memory, a familiar name, a certain song, a photograph, or perhaps a simple reminder that appeared when they least expected it. Under normal circumstances, it should have meant very little. But the instant it happened, something inside them reacted in a way they were completely unprepared for. At first they tried to ignore it. They told themselves it was nothing. After all, people remember the past from time to time. That is part of being human. But this felt different. The emotional response was immediate and impossible to overlook. It was not just a memory returning, it was a feeling returning. A feeling they were absolutely certain had disappeared long ago. The moment caught them so off guard that they found themselves stopping and asking, "Why did that affect me so much?" It was a simple question, but one they could not easily answer. The strange thing was that the emotion did not vanish after a few minutes. It stayed. Hours later, they were still thinking about it. They replayed the moment in their mind, trying to understand what had happened. The more they reflected, the more confused they became. If they had truly moved on, why was their reaction so strong? If those feelings were really gone, why did this one small experience have the power to bring them rushing back to the surface? And listen to this. What unsettled them most was the familiarity of what they were feeling. It was as if a part of themselves they had not visited in a very long time suddenly came alive again. The emotions were not new. They recognized them immediately. That recognition is what made the experience impossible to dismiss. They could not pretend these feelings belonged to someone else. They could not convince themselves it was simply nostalgia. Deep down, they knew they were reconnecting with something real. As the day continued, they noticed subtle changes within themselves. Their thoughts kept drifting back to the connection. Memories they had not considered in years began appearing with surprising clarity. Small details resurfaced. Conversations, moments, feelings, things they assumed had faded with time, suddenly felt vivid again. The more they remembered, the more difficult it became to maintain the belief that everything had been left behind. What made this even more surprising was that they had not been searching for these emotions. They had not been hoping to revisit the past. In fact, they were perfectly comfortable with the idea that the chapter was over. Yet this unexpected moment challenged that belief completely. It forced them to consider a possibility they had never seriously entertained before. What if time had not erased the feelings? What if it had only buried them beneath routine, distraction, and distance? Now they find themselves standing in a place of uncertainty. The confidence they once had about moving on is no longer as solid as it seemed. The unexpected moment opened a door they thought had been permanently closed. And no matter how hard they try to explain it away, one realization continues growing stronger. Something they believed was gone has returned. Not because it was recreated, not because it suddenly appeared out of nowhere, but because it may have been there all along, quietly waiting for the right moment to remind them that it never truly left. And listen to this, because once that unexpected moment awakened something inside them, there was no going back to the certainty they once had. Before, they could confidently say the feelings were gone. Before, they could look at the past with emotional distance and believe it no longer held any power over them. But now, every time they tried to return to that mindset, something felt different. The emotions that resurfaced refused to quietly disappear. Instead, they lingered. They followed them through ordinary days, appearing during unexpected moments and forcing them to confront a truth they had spent years believing was no longer relevant. At first, they hoped the feelings would fade again on their own. They assumed a little time would restore the emotional distance they had grown accustomed to. But the opposite happened. The more they tried to move forward as though nothing had changed, the more aware they became of what was happening inside them. Memories began returning with unusual clarity. Not just the major moments, but the small details they never expected to remember. Certain conversations, certain expressions, certain feelings attached to moments they had not thought about in a very long time. It was as though their heart had reopened, a chapter their mind believed was already finished. What surprised them most was the emotional depth attached to those memories. They expected nostalgia. They expected a brief reminder of the past. What they did not expect was the sense of connection they still felt. Every memory seemed to carry an emotional weight that should not have existed if the feelings were truly gone. And that realization became increasingly difficult to ignore. Because if the emotions had disappeared, why did these memories still affect them so strongly? Why did thinking about the connection still create such a powerful response? And listen to this. There have been quiet moments recently when they stopped fighting the feelings and simply observed them. In those moments, a surprising realization began taking shape. The emotions returning did not feel new. They felt familiar. That distinction changed everything. New emotions would have been easier to explain. They could have dismissed them as temporary confusion or a reaction to a random event. But these feelings felt like something they already knew, something that had existed before, something that had simply been silent for a long time. The more they reflected on this, the more they began questioning everything they thought they understood about moving on. Maybe moving on does not always mean feelings disappear. Maybe sometimes it simply means life becomes busy enough that those feelings stop demanding attention. Maybe emotions can remain beneath the surface without influencing daily life until something unexpectedly brings them back into view. This possibility has become impossible for them to ignore because it explains what they are experiencing far better than any other explanation they have found. Recently, they have also started looking at the connection differently. Before, they viewed it as something that belonged entirely to the past. Now they are beginning to wonder whether they underestimated its significance. The emotional response they are having feels too strong to dismiss as coincidence. It feels too meaningful to explain away as a passing moment. Every reflection seems to point toward the same conclusion. The connection affected them more deeply than they admitted, even to themselves. Now they find themselves facing a reality they never expected. The feelings they were so certain had faded may never have disappeared at all. They may have simply become dormant, resting quietly beneath years of routine, distraction, and emotional distance. And once that unexpected moment brought them back to the surface, everything changed. Because the more honest they become with themselves, the harder it is to deny what their heart is trying to show them. What they are feeling now is not the creation of something new. It is the return of something familiar. And that realization is forcing them to see the entire connection through a completely different lens than ever before. And listen to this, because this is the stage where your soulmate can no longer hide behind logic. For a while, they tried to explain everything away. They told themselves the emotions would settle down. They convinced themselves that what they were experiencing was temporary. They believed that if they simply stayed busy and focused on other things, the feelings would eventually return to the background where they had been for so long. But every attempt to minimize what was happening only seemed to make one thing clearer. The emotions were real. They were persistent. And most importantly, they were refusing to be ignored. What makes this situation so challenging is that they now find themselves caught between two powerful forces. On one side is logic. Logic reminds them of the time that has passed. It reminds them of the reasons they believed they had moved on. It points to everything that has changed and encourages them to continue looking forward. Logic prefers certainty. It prefers neat conclusions. It wants the story to remain exactly as they believed it was. According to logic, reopening old emotions serves no purpose. According to logic, what is done. But on the other side is emotion. Emotion does not care about timelines. Emotion does not care about carefully constructed explanations. Emotion responds to what feels true. And lately, what feels true is becoming impossible for them to ignore. Every time they try convincing themselves the feelings are insignificant, another memory surfaces. Every time they attempt to dismiss the connection, another emotional realization appears. It is as if their heart is quietly challenging every conclusion their mind worked so hard to establish. And listen to this. One of the questions that keeps returning to them is deeply uncomfortable. Have I been lying to myself? Not intentionally, not in a dishonest way. But have they mistaken emotional silence for emotional resolution? Have they confused distance with healing? Have they assumed that because the feelings became quiet, they must have disappeared? These questions have become difficult to answer because the evidence in front of them tells a different story. If the feelings were truly gone, they would not be experiencing this level of emotional response. If the connection no longer mattered, it would not continue occupying so much space in their thoughts. There have been moments recently when they tried to imagine never thinking about the connection again. Every time they do, something feels incomplete. Not because they are trapped in the past, but because a part of them recognizes that there is still something meaningful here, something unresolved, something they never fully understood. This realization has created an emotional tension that follows them throughout their day. One moment they feel certain they should move on. The next moment they find themselves questioning why the connection still feels so alive. What surprises them most is how quickly certainty has turned into uncertainty. Just weeks ago they believed they had all the answers. Now they find themselves questioning assumptions they carried for years. The unexpected moment that awakened these emotions did more than bring back memories. It exposed cracks in a narrative they had accepted without question. A narrative that said the feelings were gone. A narrative that said the connection no longer mattered. A narrative that no longer feels completely true. And listen to this, because the deeper they go into this internal struggle, the harder it becomes to maintain emotional distance. They are beginning to understand that there is a difference between moving forward and fully letting go. Perhaps they move forward. Perhaps they built a life, embraced new experiences, and continued growing as a person. But letting go may be an entirely different matter. Letting go requires emotional closure. And lately, they are starting to wonder whether they ever truly reached that point. Now they stand in the middle of a battle between what they think they should feel and what they actually feel. Logic continues offering explanations, but emotion continues offering evidence. And with every passing day, the evidence grows stronger. The memories feel real. The connection feels significant. The emotions feel familiar. Most importantly, the feelings no longer feel like something they can simply dismiss. For the first time in a very long time, they are beginning to accept a possibility they once rejected completely. The unexpected moment did not create these emotions. It revealed them. And now that they have seen the truth beneath the surface, pretending nothing has changed is no longer an option. The only question remaining is whether they are ready to fully accept what their heart has been trying to tell them all along. And listen to this, because your soulmate is finally reaching the point where the truth can no longer be hidden behind explanations, distractions, or carefully constructed assumptions. For so long, they believed they understood exactly what happened to their feelings. They believed time had done what time is supposed to do. They believed distance had weakened the connection. They believed life had carried them far enough away from those emotions that they no longer had any real influence. But after everything that has happened, after the unexpected moment, the resurfacing memories, the emotional conflict, and the endless reflection, they are beginning to see something they never expected to see. The feelings they thought had disappeared were never truly gone. What makes this realization so powerful is that it did not arrive all at once. It emerged slowly, piece by piece, until there was simply too much evidence to ignore. Every memory that returned carried emotional weight. Every reflection uncovered another layer of truth. Every attempt to dismiss what they were feeling only made those feelings stronger. Eventually, they reached a point where continuing to deny it required more energy than accepting it. And that is when everything started becoming clear. Lately, they have been reflecting on how certain emotions managed to survive despite everything that happened. Time passed. Circumstances changed. Life moved forward. Yet somehow, the connection remained present beneath the surface. Not always visible. Not always demanding attention, but present. The unexpected moment that triggered all of this did not create something new inside them. It simply revealed what had been there all along. Like uncovering an old photograph hidden away for years, the image was not newly created. It had simply been forgotten until someone found it again. And listen to this. One of the biggest realizations they are having right now is that they spent years misunderstanding what emotional healing actually means. They believed healing meant never feeling those emotions again. They believed moving on meant reaching a point where the connection no longer mattered. But now they understand something different. Sometimes healing does not erase significance. Sometimes growth does not eliminate feeling. Sometimes a connection can remain meaningful even after a person has learned to live without constantly thinking about it. That understanding has changed everything. There have been moments recently when they stopped fighting the truth and simply allowed themselves to acknowledge it. In those moments, they felt something unexpected. Relief, not because every question was answered, but because the internal struggle finally began ending. The battle between logic and emotion started losing its intensity. The need to explain everything disappeared. For the first time, they allowed themselves to admit what their heart had been trying to communicate all along. This connection mattered more than they realized. The feelings ran deeper than they admitted. and the emotional impact never completely left. What surprises them most is how different the truth feels from what they feared. For so long, they avoided these emotions because they thought acknowledging them would create confusion. They thought it would reopen wounds. They thought it would pull them backward. Instead, honesty has brought clarity. Instead of feeling trapped, they feel aware. Instead of feeling lost, they feel connected to a truth that finally makes sense. The emotions they are experiencing are no longer frightening because they understand where they come from.